Today on Callahan's Garage, we are going deep into David's Beetle. We are finally going to start looking at the heater channels on this thing. You are not going to want to miss it.
Hey, I'm Callahan. Welcome to Callahan's Garage.
Alright folks, welcome back to Callahan's Garage. My name's Callahan and today we are back looking at David's Beetle. So we've already done a ton of work to this car. We did the front apron, we did the rear apron and some quarter work. We did the floor pans on it. So if you haven't seen those videos, please go check them out and let me know what you think. But today we are going to start talking about doing the heater channels on this thing. So for a lot of people, doing heater channels, doing the rocker panel sections is a really big, daunting, intimidating task. So I'm going to do my best to kind of break this down step by step. We're going to look at it in a couple of different parts. That way, this is a little less intimidating. Hopefully you've got the confidence to go ahead and tackle a job like this yourself. So like I was saying, we're going to break this down into a couple of different stages for the sake of, to length of the videos and everything, and kind of make it as easy to understand the whole process as I can. So one of the first things I want to talk about is, what is the heater channel? When we talk about a Beetle, oftentimes this rocker panel area gets referred to as the heater channel. So that's what we're talking about. And the main reason we call it that is because, all of our heat that comes from our fresh air, our sterile air heater boxes on the engine blow through this rocker panel and up into the dash and into the footwell and everything. That's where the heat comes from. So there's a heat tube, inside of this rocker panel. And that's kind of the reason that this gets referred to as the heater channel. But what a lot of people don't really realize is that this heater channel, this rocker panel, so we have an outer rocker, we have an inner rocker, we have a lower plate that goes onto this. So, this whole structure of our rocker panel is really what holds the car together. This heater channel keeps the whole car from kind of flexing, up or down or sideways. So this is a really crucial area, for the structure of the body of the car. So one of the things we need to think about, before we just go cutting into this and taking everything apart, is the condition of the car. So on this car, like I said, this is a 65 Beetle. It's in relatively good shape. So, our pillars, our lower quarters, all this is in good shape. Our A pillars are in very nice shape. It's really just like the bottoms of the heater channels and a little bit on the inside that's crusty. So we're gonna just go ahead and rip all of that out and put brand new fresh metal in. But, if you are looking at a car that is substantially rustier than this one, for example, where we've got a lot of rust into the quarters and into our pillars, so then there's a lot that we have to think about in keeping the car in the shape that it needs to be. So one of the easiest ways to tell, is if your car is in the correct shape or not, is, does the door close correctly? So when you close the door should close relatively easily, and your body line across here should line up. So, if it doesn't, there's a couple steps that we can take, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But if it does, we don't really have a lot to worry about. We know that this car is basically in the shape that we need it to be. So our main focus is just going to be to retain the shape of the car once we cut, a big chunk of the structure out. Okay, so like I was saying, this car is in relatively good shape. So the first thing we're going to do before we start the heater channel job is we're just going to brace the car up so that it stays in the correct shape while we have, most of this structure cut out. So basically, there's a few different ways we can do that. But basically all we really need to do is we need to fabricate some kind of brace between our A pillar and our B pillar on both sides of the car. And then we're going to do another brace between our B pillars and between our A pillars. And I'm going to show you guys exactly how I'm going to do all that. And like I said, there's a couple different ways to do this. I've done it a couple different ways throughout the years. But the biggest factor here, is going to be the condition of the car. So like I said, on this car, this car is in relatively good shape. So we're going to do kind of minimal bracing on here. But if your car is in really rough shape, you really, it's kind of out of whack, you may need to do some more substantial bracing. We'll kind of look at that as we do all of this. But one of the big factors to think of, if you're looking at your car and say, well, I don't really know, if my car is in good shape or bad shape, or if it's out of whack or not, one of the key areas you can look at is the bottom of the A-pillar here. So if the bottom of the A-pillar is still attached to the heater channel, then you're ahead of the game a little bit already. If it's not, if the bottom of this A-pillar moves around when you close the door, or it's visibly, already rusted apart from the heater channels, then we've got a few other things we need to think about, and we'll kind of look at that here in a second. So let's dive into this thing. Okay, so we're ready to start bracing this car up, and the first thing I would normally do is just take the door off of the body, get it out of the way. We're not going to be working on the door at this point. Just take it off, get it out of the way. However, let's kind of imagine that this car is, a lot rustier than it actually is, and this door doesn't fit correctly, and our dimensions aren't right, and the body's already kind of tweaked out of whack. So what I would want to do first is get the door to fit correctly as best I can. So there's a couple of different ways we can go about doing this. The absolutely correct, 100% perfect way would be to have the car like on a frame table, with all of our body dimensions and everything laid out, and we could jack and pull and twist the car into the correct shape, as we're bracing it up. But if you don't have that luxury, there's a very easy way to do it, and we can still get, very good results without having, all of the big fancy equipment and everything. And the easiest way to do that is to get the door fitting as good as we can before we brace the car up. So like a lot of times when our A-pillar rusts out, the door will sag in the back really heavy, and that makes the door hard to close, and it doesn't fit right. It throws all of our body gaps off. Also, what can happen, if our B-pillar is rusted out, the body and the door can kind of tweak in and out away from each other. So when we're talking about getting this door fitting correctly, that's what we're looking at is, does this body line up on the door and the rear quarter? Does our front A-pillar gap between the A-post and the door, is that nice and even? Is our gap on the B-pillar nice and even? Is our door fitting nicely and evenly all the way around? And what we can do is, we can kind of lift on the door and twist the door and tweak on the body to get this thing into position. And don't be afraid to get medieval and really put some movement into the car. You can hang on these door hinges and tweak them around, and you're not really going to do a lot of damage that we're not going to be fixing already. So that's what we want to do is, we would want to get this door fitting as best as we can. And once you get it to that point, what you would want to do is weld the door in place. So, I know that sounds, a little counterintuitive, but, if we're getting to this point, most of the time we're painting the car anyway. So, all we really need to do is you just take a little piece of this is like 1/8 little strap here. And what I would do is I would just cut me a piece of this and I would weld it around just a little bit right here. And I'm not talking about, fully seam welding this on. Just put you a few little tack welds on here. And then I would do the same thing, down here near the bottom of the door. And what that's going to do is that's going to lock this door in place. That's going to lock that A-pillar in place, because it's bolted up to the door. So that's going to keep everything in place before we go bracing the car up. So we would do that on this side, we would do that on the other side, and then we could jump in and start bracing the car up. But like I said, on this car, it's in very good shape. Everything's basically where it needs to be already. So I'm going to yank the doors off, and then we'll start bracing the car up. Also, before I yank this door off, kind of one other thing I want to mention, if you're into a project like this, like on this car, we're already, into the woods on this one. But, if you're starting a project fresh like this, where you're going to be doing heater channels, you're going to be doing extensive metal work, all of this bracing and tweaking and fitting is something that you would want to do before you take the body off of the pan, and that kind of helps to ensure that everything is absolutely in the correct place. So I have run into instances, in the past where I've had somebody bring me a car that they started on where they didn't brace it up correctly from the get-go, and the car kind of got tweaked out of shape just from sitting from over time, so that ideally, all of this bracing would be the first step you do before you start taking the body off, before you start cutting anything out, before you take the car apart to any degree. And that just kind of helps to get everything exactly in the right place and ensure that you're going to be correct, throughout the entire process. So just keep that in mind, if you're getting into a project, from the get-go, knowing that this is, the extent that we're going, just go ahead and do that first. And that's gonna buy you some insurance, long term. Especially, if the car's sitting on sawhorses, if the car's sitting for any length of time. This metal can, move around with temperature and the weight of the car and everything. So, getting all that stuff locked into place from the get-go can really, be a good thing. Also, I want to mention, I'm doing all of this on my rotisserie, so the rotisserie also adds a lot of structure into this car. Normally on a car that's in this good a condition, I wouldn't even really take the time to brace the car up because the rotisserie is already adding a lot of rigidity and structure to the car. Basically, all I would do is just do a heater channel, one side at a time, and I wouldn't really be concerned about the car moving around too much. But, if you're doing this on a pair of sawhorses or, something else that doesn't support the entire structure of the car, this bracing is critical. This isn't a step that you want to skip, especially like we've been talking about. If the car is rusty, if the car is out of whack, you don't want to skip a step like this because it's just going to keep everything right where you want it the entire time that you're working on the car. Okay, so we got one of our doors off, no problem. It came off super easy. The second door, we're running into a few little issues, which is super common on these. All of our doors are just held on with a series of these big, Phillips head screws, and these can absolutely be a nightmare to get out. So, these threads just grow together, the screws seize up, especially if the door's never been off of the car. A lot of times these can be really difficult to get out. So, I got my cordless impact and was able to get, most of them out. If you can also use, like a little impact driver tool like these. These will break them loose a lot of times, very easily. There's a few other specialty tools that people have made and, kind of cobbled together over the years. Those are fine. But in this case, one of our bottom screws down here is seized up and the other screw has already been stripped out. So, a lot of times what people will do is they'll just drill the head of that screw off and then take the door off and say, oh, well, I'll just worry about it later. And if you're replacing the A-pillars, that's fine. They come with new screw plates and everything in them. That's fine. Just drill the screws off, get the doors out of the way. Don't worry about it. But in this case, these A-pillars are in very good shape. So we want to get these screws out intact. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take my drill, I'm just going to drill the head of that screw a little bit, and then I'm going to weld a bolt to it. And what that's going to do is that's going to put some heat into the screw that should, free up those threads, and then it'll give me a nice big bolt head to just be able to back that screw out really easy. Okay, so we got our doors off out of the way, relatively painless. So we're ready to start bracing up the body. All right, so when we talk about bracing this thing up, there's several different ways we can go about this. But the main goal is for us to just weld in, some kind of temporary structure that's gonna hold the body in place when we cut out our heater channels. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put some cross pieces across my door jamb here. So just a straight piece of tubing from my A pillar back to my B pillar. I'm going to do that on both sides. And then I'm going to run another piece of tubing laterally to connect those two pieces. So basically what I'm going to do is just build this, rough square frame in here that's going to tie all of my pillars together and keep everything locked in place. So I've already gone ahead and cut one door bar. And basically this is just going to fit into my door jamb here and kind of take the place of this heater channel. And you can see I've cut this to fit and it just fits in there nicely. What you don't want to do is go forcing this thing in here and hammering it into place, because what that's doing is building tension inside of this door jamb. So as soon as we go and we cut that heater channel out, all of that tension that's in this bar is going to spread this door jamb open, and that's not what we want. We want this to stay exactly where it is currently. So I'm going to weld this one in. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and then I'm going to weld two pieces to connect these across. Now, in this car, the headliner is still in it, and I'm trying to not damage the headliner. So, if you have the doors still on the car, like we talked about earlier, if you have the doors on here, the doors are welded in place, holding everything together, what you can do is you can weld across, you can put these pieces across, and then tie your two cross pieces together inside of the door. So like I said, there's a lot of different ways we can do this. And once I get this structure set up, we'll look at some of the other additional things we can do to that as well. Okay, so we're going to take a little bit closer look at what we've got here so far. So I've got both of our door bars welded in, and you can see this is just 1-inch square tubing. It's like 1/8 inch wall, nothing special. And all we've done is we've welded it to our B pillar, we've welded it to our A pillar. And you can see where I've got this welded, I'm just slightly favoring the outer half of the A pillar. So remember, this A pillar is just sheet metal. So, if we weld this right in the center, it can have a tendency to flex a little bit. We might lose some of our place. But if we favor the outside a little bit, we're right along this edge. And any edge like this is what we call, work hardened material. So there's a little bit more strength closer to this edge just because this piece has been formed, it's been work hardened. So we've got a little more strength right across the edge. So on the A pillar and the B pillar both, I'm just slightly favoring the outside. And all that's doing is giving me a little more strength in that joint there. So now we're just going to cut us two pieces to go across and tie these bars together. Okay, so we've got the car totally braced up now. This is plenty for what we're going to do here. This is kind of the minimum that I would recommend bracing your car up. Like I said before, on the rotisserie, I'm pretty confident that this thing isn't going to move around. And also being a relatively solid car, I'm not too concerned that anything's going to move around, once we pull the heater channels out of this thing. And also remember, I said I'm going to do one side at a time. If you are planning on cutting both of your heater channels out entirely, or if they're already completely rusted out, some more substantial bracing will be necessary. So if you need to do more than this, kind of the next thing would be a crossbar, higher up our B post. I would do another bar in the door jamb, so it would basically go higher up the B pillar, down and across to the A pillar. And then internally, you would just kind of weld in some braces and kind of triangulate all that so it all ties together, really tight. And keep in mind, this is all temporary. This isn't a roll cage. It doesn't have to be perfect. We just want nice solid welds, triangulation, keeping everything, where it needs to be. That's the main goal, so don't get too carried away, because also remember, you know, once we start working on these heater channels, you're going to need to be in the car some. So we don't want to completely fill up the car with tubing so much that we can't get in here and work as well. But like I said, you know, for our purposes, this is more than sufficient. This is going to keep everything locked in place the whole time. So next thing we'll do, we'll start tearing into this thing and start putting some new metal in. So if there's any specific questions that you guys have about any of this process, you know, leave them in the comments and I'll get to them in the next video. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. You know, we got a lot of work left to do here and I don't want you guys to miss any of the steps. So we'll save that for next time. I'll see you guys later.